Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to Our Issues Birmingham. We have a repeat guest today. I told you I would have him back because there was more I wanted to talk to him about. One thing with specificity, but Bill Baxley, my good friend, former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Alabama, former Attorney General of the state of Alabama.
Thanks, Tommy.
Welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me back.
The last time we spoke, you gave us some historical information about where you were in 1964 when Governor George Wallace was standing in the door at the University of Alabama at the height of the civil rights movement and the strife that existed in this country between those that wanted to remain segregated and those that didn't. And it gave you inspiration to try to do something to correct the wrong that was being exhibited back in that time frame. Coincidentally, you had an opportunity to prosecute certain individuals that were involved and ultimately were convicted of causing the 16th Street church bombing here in Birmingham, which is one of the largest historical events during that time frame. Can you talk to us about how you came to be involved in that case and what specifically got you there? And just give us some details about that entire event.
Sure. You're 1 year off. It was in '63 that Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door.
Okay. Well, I was hung up with the Beatles back then.
In fact, '63 was a very momentous year. Earlier in that year, Medgar Evers in Mississippi was assassinated. Then in June, June the 11th, I think, or 12th, Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door that I witnessed. Later that summer, in August, they had the March on Washington and the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. But then September 15th was, I think, one of the darkest days in Alabama's history. That's when the bomb went off here in Birmingham at the 16th Street Baptist Church, and it killed 4 little girls, innocent little girls. I remember exactly where I was. I was getting ready to eat dinner at my fraternity house and watch pro football, and word came out there'd been a bombing at a church and there'd been some injuries, and it turned out there'd been fatalities, and it turned out there were 4 little children and other injuries. And of course, I lost my appetite. But that night, and there'd been a lot of bad things done, but to me, that was the worst of all. When you kill 4 little children in a house of worship that haven't done anything to anybody except be born with the wrong color skin, according to what some people think is the wrong color. Mm-hmm. So that night, I kind of made a promise to myself that I wanted to do something about that if I could. Now you got to understand what I envisioned being able to do something about. I thought maybe the feds would find out who did it and bring a case, and if they did, I was going to go up and volunteer to write briefs, help write briefs, run errands, bring Cokes and hot dogs and cigarettes and carry law books or anything I could do. That's what I envisioned being able to do, just help the investigators or the lawyers or whatever, and then it never occurred to me that I'd be able to do anything more than that. But lo and behold, less than 7 years later, I was elected Attorney General of Alabama, and the day before I was to get sworn in on Sunday, they had issued us badges and commissions and signed the keys to the office and all that. And that was before the Watts line. Before these 800 numbers. But we had there's some kind of thing the state had where they had a sheet of a card with numbers for all the major cities in Alabama, the big cities, and also Decatur and Florence and Dothan and Selma and Phoenix City and Gadsden, all those cities that size. And so you could call the local number. You'd have the number for each town. And if you were in that town, you could call that local number and it would ring at the state switchboard. And then you could ask them to ring the Attorney General's office, Governor's office, agriculture, whatever. Or you could tell them, they had ladies that answered, switchboard operators, you could call in from Huntsville and say, hey, how about dialing this number in Mobile for me? And they'd do that. So I knew I'd be using that card pretty frequently. And so I sat down that afternoon and I thought back to what I had promised myself I wanted to do. And I said, you fixing to go into the office, probably the only office in the world that can do something more than run errands about those little girls being killed in that bomb, and with that bomb in that church. And so I sat down and on that card with those numbers, I wrote one of the little girls' names in each corner, because I wanted every time I used it, remember that I wanted to use that time I'm in office to do something about it. So that's how I got started on it.
But the prosecution was not until years later.
Well, we started that the next week.
Well, before we get into that, we're going to take a break and we're going to bring it up to the actual charging and ultimate trial where you partner with Doug Jones to make that happen, or however that went down. I don't know precisely.
Okay.
I know you'll enlighten us on it. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with Bill Baxley about a very historical event in our state. This is Our Issues Birmingham. Don't go away. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We're talking about the 16th Street church bombing and Bill's involvement in that prosecution, which started the day after he wrote those young ladies' names on that card. So there was a state prosecution. We knew nothing about who had done what at that point in time, I trust.
We didn't. But
we being law enforcement.
We being the Attorney General's law enforcement and state law enforcement, and the city of Birmingham law enforcement. We knew the elements of what had happened, but nobody, and some people had suspicions, but as far as a case, no. Now the feds had some good information and knew who did it.
Early on.
But within minutes after it happened.
Knowing and being able to piece together a case. There's a rumor that has floated around Birmingham forever that it was planned underneath the bridge that goes over the Cahaba River over out by 280.
It's absolutely correct.
Really?
Yes. They made the bomb under there, I think. They planned it anyway.
And so what was the first prosecution?
Okay. We started in January of '71 working about, the Attorney General's office. And the first thing I did was get the files from the state troopers. And then later we got copies of the files from the Birmingham Police Department and Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. And most of the information in those files was absolutely worthless because of the manpower and the hours of investigation by all the local and state agencies was spent on this crazy theory that seems insane now, and really was insane then, but the theory that the state and the local people went after, that the church members, the black citizens of Birmingham, placed the bomb themselves in order to get sympathy for the cause. It sounds incredible that anybody would pursue that.
What's incredible to me is that we hear some of the same things being argued as we speak today relative to January 6th. But I digress. Let's not talk about that.
Well, we found some tidbits in there that were useful. We got off on, first of all, some wild goose chases, but our first suspect was a guy from Georgia named J.B. Stoner, but it wasn't wasted because we found out although he didn't bomb that church, he bombed Reverend Shuttlesworth's church earlier. And so we later made a case against Stoner. He was the most anti-Semitic guy I think America's ever had. And we ended up convicting him on a separate bombing, the Shuttlesworth church. But we finally started making some progress on the right people that had done it, the Klan that made the bomb under the Cahaba River Bridge. And they were led by a guy named Bob Chambliss, Robert Chambliss. His nickname was Dynamite Bob, and he loved the nickname. And when we started making progress on there, we realized that the FBI, they knew who did it within minutes after when it happened. So we needed to get their cooperation. And I thought it'd be fairly simple because the statute of limitations on the federal case had run and ended in '68. They closed the file, yes. Yeah. And we could not get the cooperation. We couldn't get them to say no, couldn't get them to say yes. And so that's what delayed us as long as we were. But finally, well, sometime pretty soon after then, after we asked, Hoover died, J. Edgar Hoover. So I thought the new director would maybe make a different decision. I had several of them come in, interim directors, and still same thing, no help. And the way we finally got some help from the FBI is a good story if I got time to tell it.
Tell it.
A guy from Alabama, grew up in Alabama, named Jack Nelson, was a reporter. Started out Atlanta Journal. But for years, he was the Washington bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times. And he and I became friends. And when I'd go to Washington, I'd usually go over to his house or we'd go out to eat or something. So one time I was up there, probably the mid-'70s by then. And he said, "You still working on that bombing case where the little girls got killed?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, what's happened?" I said, "Well, I think we're going to have to shut it down. I think we know who did it now. We're pretty confident of what we got, but we can't do anything without the FBI coming in and letting us work with them because they had the same suspects and we just need to compare notes." And so he said, "Well, I think I might can help you with them if you want me to try." I said, "Sure." And so the next morning I'd gone back to my hotel after, like that night. And next morning the phone rang and it was Nelson. He said, "Baxley, you had your coffee yet?" I said, "Yeah, 2 cups." He said, "All right, you sure you want me to try to help you get the FBI to work with you on that case?" I said, "Yeah, of course. We're out of luck if we don't." He said, "Well, all right, I just want to make sure you felt the same after you've had your coffee that you did when you had those beers and said you wanted to do it." So Nelson went over there and I think he used some threats about what the LA Times was going to do, and they said, "Well, give us a few days." And so Nelson called and said, "I think you're going to be hearing something good." And they called, said, "Mr. Baxley, that request you got over here," they acted like it had just been there a week. It'd been there 5 years. Said, we can't let you have the files, but if you'll send somebody to Birmingham to the office, we'll give them an office in the FBI office in Birmingham and work with them." And so we did, and that's when we focused in and started really making some progress. That was about 75, because I remember Gerald Ford was president.
And who was charged first?
Bob Chambliss, Dynamite Bob.
Was charged first.
He was the only one we charged because
on the state charges in the 70s.
On the state charge, and he was indicted for first-degree murder for the murder. We had 4 indictments, one for each girl.
Right.
And so we tried Denise McNair first. I made it 4 separate cases, thinking if we lost, we could come back, or somebody else could come back, and
Get
that
another
probably
shot
wouldn't
at
have worked. It would have still probably been double jeopardy. But that's why I indicted 4 separate cases.
All right, we're going to take a break and wrap up with where that went
Okay.
from that point in time. This is Our Issues Birmingham. Don't go away. I know you're on the edge of your seat. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We're talking about the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham. So we get cooperation from the FBI, we make a case, we bring a case, we get a conviction. Then what happens?
Well, we got limited cooperation, but it was still good help. And the FBI agents did a good job investigating back when it happened, really good. It was the higher ups that I had my quarrel with. But we convicted Chambliss, and then I had to leave office. So the biggest regret that I had in my entire political career, a public service career, was that I left office and we only had convicted Chambliss. That I knew who else the bombers were. There were 2 of them still alive, I worried quite a bit for 20-something years.
Fast forward to the 90s.
And if I had known that there was a young law student going to school in Birmingham during that Chambliss trial that cut class and attended every minute of that trial, sitting up in the balcony of the courthouse watching.
Third floor courtroom.
And he was watching every minute of it. And the people that had come in office after I left didn't do anything. Wouldn't touch. They thought it was unpopular, or they couldn't, or something. So all those years, those people that I wasn't able to try were walking around free because nobody continued the case until this kid that was cut class and watched that trial 20-something years later was the U.S. attorney. And that kid was Doug Jones.
Right.
And he came in the 90s and picked up that ball and scored touchdowns because now he had to do it in state court because the federal statute had run. Bill Pryor made Doug, who was the U.S. attorney, a special assistant attorney general, and they got indictments in state court and tried them in the same courtroom that I tried Chambliss in. So Doug Jones, that kid that had cut class and watched us try Chambliss, tried the others, and 20-something years later in the same courtroom that we had convicted Chambliss.
Did he try them together?
No, separate. It was a year or 2 apart. He convicted Tommy Blanton, and convicted Bobby Frank Cherry. And so at the end of the day, when Doug finished with them, and Bill Pryor, as I said, appointed him a special assistant attorney general because they had to be tried in state court. But Doug was the sitting U.S. attorney when he tried the cases.
I remember.
And Doug will always be one of my heroes because he finished what I couldn't finish.
Are you still in touch with Doug?
Yes.
We've had him on the show a number of times. I've never really gone into this subject matter with him, but I think I might invite him back.
Well, he'll always be one of my heroes for doing what he did. And so it ended up with all the ones that were still alive, all the Klansmen that killed those little girls died in an Alabama prison for their act. And I'll always be grateful to Doug.
That's quite a story, Bill, that you witnessed from the perspective of being a college student, a law student, to the point of being an attorney general, to the point of being a private practitioner, your vision of what you wanted to see done to right the wrong, to be able to see that to its conclusion. I think that's fascinating.
Well, I'm grateful that I was in a position where I could help do something about it, and I'm grateful that I lived long enough to see something done after I left, thanks to what Doug did.
Well, we are too, Bill. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate your information and enlightenment on a very, as you put it, horrible part of our history. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tommy. Anytime.
This is Our Issues Birmingham. We'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for being with us.
I am blind, but I need not see. I know this road is there for me.
I think it's just vapor and flavors. It won't hurt my kid like cigarettes.
Get your head out of the cloud. Talk to your kid about vaping. Visit talkaboutvaping.org.
When I first saw Turtle, my heart was full. Now I'm anything but lonely.
We had this deep connection, this heart connection.
He just wants to be close to you and part of your life.
Every day with Turtle is a perfect day.
When I'm holding her, it makes me feel calmer.
I think everything he does shows how much he loves us.
When we adopt a shelter pet,
We discover
they're a little bit of a lot of things.
But they're all pure love.
Hang on! Something unforgettable is coming to Comet.
Live long and prosper.
It's the first annual Comet Fest.
Got it. Beam me up. Find it on your digital dial on 21.3.
The father is...
Background stealing the scene.
The father is you, John.
With Next Gen TV and Dolby, dialogue is crystal clear.
That's right, there are two N's.
We're not gonna make it!
Volume catching you by surprise.
N. That's right, there are two N's. We're
not gonna make it!
With Next Gen TV and Dolby, there are no more sound surprises. Make the sound decision and choose Next Gen TV.